So in the 2010s, we have Hamilton, the original Broadway cast recording. This comes out in 2015. I'm going to be honest, it's funny, someone that's a musician, someone that's musical, I generally don't like musicals. Every time I watch a musical, I find them they're kind of campy, they're kind of cheesy. It feels like the music is old and doesn't hold up anymore. I always find myself when I'm watching a musical, I'm thinking, man, I really wish they would just speak their lines like actors instead of singing them. I'm a harsh critic going into a musical. And you asked me, you said, man, you got to watch it. It's amazing. So it's on Disney Plus. So you can go watch Hamilton now on Disney Plus. And within 15 minutes, it was by far the greatest musical I have ever seen. I not only didn't hate it, I was actually loving it. And I was telling myself, I'll do the first 30. It's almost 3 hours. So I'm like,
It's long. Yeah.
I'll do the first 30 minutes or I'll do 45 minutes. And just every song would go into the next one. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And there was a hip hop flavor and it felt fresh. And the acting was great and the singing was great and the rapping was great. And
And the story. What about the
I
story?
was enthralled by it. And yes, absolutely the story as well. So I could talk a lot about it, but I guess for you, this is kind of the odd choice amongst your five albums. Can you maybe share a little bit about your experience with the play and or the soundtrack?
Yeah, it is weird in my five albums, but I've it's kind of not weird as far as my personal taste goes because I've always loved musicals. I mean, one of my very first musical experiences that I remember was going to see Sound of Music with my parents at the Kingston Grand Theater and being completely blown away by that. And later on, I was big time into Jesus Christ Superstar and not just musicals, but also like rock operas, like Tommy and that kind of thing. It's because it's not that different. A rock opera and a modern musical are not that far removed from each other. Yeah, so I mean, I like the classics. I like the classic musicals, and I love some of the modern ones. Come From Away, which is a Canadian production, is also an incredible music, incredible thing. And actually, just kind of off topic, but kind of not. When I was at Queens in first year university, I may or may not have told the story when we did our deep dive, but I was dying to get into a rock band. I was in first year and I was living in residence, and but I was so kind of focused on just my classes and kind of trying to get through that first year thing that I never didn't put up a poster or do anything to try to figure out how I was going to get into a rock band. But I was in drama class, and the first year drama students were going to be putting on a writing and putting on a musical. And so I went out to that and got totally involved and ended up being the composer for this musical that was written by all these first year students that we then put on at a theater at the end of the year. And I wrote, I think, 6 songs for it, and I still remember them. They're not bad. I was 18 years old though, so they're not great, but they're not bad, and they're definitely of the rock opera kind of musical kind of vibe. But Mark McAway was in the audience on the night of the performance. And he was, turns out he had a mutual friend, and he says that he remembers being in the audience and thinking to himself, I should start a band with that guy. And so he got invited to the cast party because he was friends with another person who was in the play. And he came up to me and said, hey, you know what? I play guitar. Do you want to start a band? And that was the beginning of what would turn into Moist. So
Without musicals, there's no Moist.
that's what I'm
I
saying.
have a
This is
newfound
what
respect for musicals.
this is
I
exactly
didn't
what
know
I'm
their
saying.
importance in the lore of Canadian rock history.
Yeah. Now Mark would deny this story. Well, he wouldn't deny it, but he still hates musicals. Kevin loves musicals though. But yeah. Anyway, so I came into Hamilton as if it was a rock opera. I came into it without having seen the play. As you may or may not know, it was like impossible to see it back in the day. It was the most difficult when it was only on Broadway. Tickets were almost impossible to come by. But the album came into being, and I think that was my wife had suggested my son's really into history. So at that point in time, he's 9 years old or something, and he's really into history. And she had heard about this thing and gave him some links to some songs. And so I heard him playing it. And so I actually and I was hearing the songs kind of out of order. and thinking, oh, these are pretty good. I don't know what the context is.
Hmm.
So one day when I had to drive to Toronto, I cracked open Apple Music and fired it up. And the one thing about it as a musical is that it doesn't require, there's no, it's a completely sung through musical. It doesn't require any dialogue to get the story. And I just couldn't believe it. It was the quickest 3 hour drive of my life, just because the songs are so incredible and the story's so compelling, and it's got everything. It's got war, and it's got politics, and it's got a
Adultery.
adultery and a love triangle, and oh my god, and the songs, the Dear Theodosia song that they sing, that when he and Burr sing it to their newborn kids, is like, it just brings tears to my eyes every time. So yeah, so that was like probably 2018. In 2019, we decided that we were definitely going to go see it in 2020, and we bought tickets to go see it on Broadway for, I think it was March 21st, 2020. Basically, the idea is that I was going to come home from recording the new Moist album, pick up the family. It was March break, and we were going to drive to New York. And my wife was calling me as I was in the studio, like, "Do you think we should go? Like, what if the borders closed? Blah blah blah." And of course, as we were in the studio, I got a message from Ticketmaster saying that the shows have been canceled. So we didn't have to decide. So I still haven't seen it live, but fortunately, through the good graces of Disney and in collaboration with Lin-Manuel Miranda, it popped up on Disney, the whole play experience, a year later or something like that, so we could all watch it that way. But my point is that I still came into it as if it was an album, not as a play, not as a film. I came to it as an album before I came into it as anything. So
And what was your initial reaction finally seeing it as a play on Disney?
I loved it. I thought it was amazing. Like, I thought the staging, the performances, the you could sort of hear it when you're listening to it, but the way they use the chorus, like the people who are in the background singing stuff, where they're not just simply singing oohs and ahs and pumping up the important bits of dialogue. They're also being used as sound effects and as percussion and as atmosphere and there's all kinds of sort of like lore that goes on as you sort of dive in, as you get into Hamill fandom, which I'm unfortunately well into. There's things you learn, like there's one stage chorus member who is known as the Bullet, who is constantly moving around and is very close, sort of representing all the times that Alex or any other character escapes death, basically, until the very end, when, spoiler alert, when Hamilton gets killed.
Oh,
Um,
spoiler.
yeah, it happened 250 years ago, so so hopefully it's not news to too many people. But yeah, did you get through the whole thing?
I did. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So
Yeah.
like the musical callbacks, like the way that the various themes kind of call back to each other, and the fact that each of the characters has their own like musical theme. Like Alexander Hamilton's theme is Alexander Hamilton, and Angelica's theme is Angelica, and Eliza's theme is Eliza, and those little like musical phrases are like wound into their performances and their songs, their entries and that kind of thing. And when you sort of dial into that, the whole thing, the more you listen to it, the more you hear, and the more you get kind of into the way it's composed, and it's an incredible piece of work.
I'm watching it and it just feels like there's this touch of genius involved, this level of mastery that's it seems impossible that a human being or several human beings even created this. So let me break this down for a second. It's hard enough for a musician or a band to write one great song, and then it's even harder to have one great album. And then if you want to do a Pink Floyd The Wall, or the Who Tommy, or a concept album, it's that much harder to not just make a great album, but to have every song flow from one to the next to tell a story. Maybe the best song to kick off the album is actually track 7, but it's like lyrically it doesn't go there, and it just adds to how much more complicated things are. And then I'm watching this musical, and again, it's not just being able to write one good song, but there's like 50 songs in this musical. And then it's again, they all have to go in order, and they have to tell an insanely complicated story. and there's
That
50
takes place over 20 years as well.
right.
Yeah.
And there's, 50 characters. So it's also who is singing which song, which means what key it has to be in. And then they don't just have it where one person sings one song. It's dialogue back and forth where half of the time a character is finishing phrases of the other person. So it's not like you say sing a line, I sing a line. It's like you sing the first three words of the line and I sing the last two. Like
Yeah.
the amount of mastery going on over a 3 hour period, I can't even fathom the amount of genius and work
Yeah.
for this to even exist.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to it this morning, or yeah, this morning, for the 50th time, and sorry, maybe 500th time. And I was thinking about as well that in even in because they cover so much time, there's some songs where over the course of a 4 minute song, they move through several years of time. And like one of the examples of that is a song like the song where they introduce Washington, the Here Comes the General, the Right Hand Man song. And it gets into the whole bit. So it begins with the beginning of the revolution, and then he introduces George Washington as a character, and George Washington does this thing, we're a gunned up man, blah blah blah. And then it talks about Hamilton's role and about the British invading New York, and about Hamilton being involved in the battle there and stealing these British cannons. And then he goes to Washington and says, "Oh, Washington calls him and says, I need you to help me do this thing." And then Burr comes in, and Burr gets all angry because, or not angry, but he's just kind of, George is very dismissive of him. And so it's several years of stuff that happens condensed into this 1 4 minute bit in such an incredible way. And the other time that happens is when in second act, when Angelica's moved off to London and she comes back to visit, and there's a whole thing that happens there where Hamilton's supposed to be getting his Congress bill through and his debt plan through, and the sisters want him to go away on holiday and he can't do it, and all this sort of stuff. And it's a thing where like several months are compressed into just like a few bars in a way that's really masterful and really clever and so cool. And sorry, your turn. I could wax on about this thing forever.
Oh, I just want to blast through the amount of critical acclaim, but also the commercial success. So, it's one of the most successful Broadway musicals of all time, but I didn't realize the success it had even with the recordings and the songs. So I'm just going to blast through this. So Hamilton came out, crazy critical acclaim. It won the Grammy for Best Musical Theater Album. It was certified diamond in
Holy
the US.
wow.
It's the only musical to be certified diamond. I think there's 94 diamond albums ever in the US, and they're your typical Michael Jackson, Beatles, Eagles, Pink Floyd. Like it's the usual suspects. So to have a musical as a diamond album, I was not expecting that. Almost every song on the album, and there's, I don't know, 50 songs, almost every song individually has gone gold, platinum, or multi-platinum. It's the best-selling cast album of all time. It's the highest charting cast album since Hair in 1969. It spent 250 consecutive weeks on the Billboard Top 200. I didn't know any of this. It's considered one of the best musicals ever. And I keep seeing Lin-Manuel Miranda that you mentioned. He seems like that genius to me when it comes to musicals because you see him, he worked on In the Heights, Hamilton, Moana, Encanto, Tick Tick Boom, like all the greatest, musicals and animated films of the last so many years. He keeps popping up as the guy that knows how to write those kind of songs. So I don't
Yeah.
know if you have anything to say about him, but he
No,
seems
but
like this genius when it comes to musicals.
yeah.
Somehow that's his niche and he's the guy.
But also for like 4 years or something, like 4 years, he had to do 8 shows a week being Hamilton in his play Hamilton. So he's like, not only did he have to compose the thing, but he had to star in it as well. And that as the title star of that thing, he has far more stage time than anybody else. So it's kind of not surprising that there hasn't been another musical by him. When you have a moment, there's a really great clip on YouTube of him introduced. He's at a dinner for the that's hosted by the Obamas, and he introduces the fact that he's working on a new play, and he and just a piano player sing perform the very first song, like the way it kicks off. So it's just him with the thing, and it's really like it's just this idea, and it took him like I think it took him 3 years to write it or something like that. It's an incredible work, absolutely amazing, and I can't even imagine the amount of workshopping that they had to do to get it all figured out and stuff. So there's two parts of the thing that I always find so incredibly compelling every time we listen to it. The first is the how clever it is, the 10 dual commandments bit, which happens 3 times in the song, where it explains exactly how a duel works, because there's 3 duels in the musical, and every time the song that's played is a variation of the 10 dual commandments thing. And I just find it so clever that there's like, there's 10 paces to a duel, and they break it into these 10 things, and every section is one of these things and explains how it works. It lays it out. So you don't have to show the entire duel happening on stage. You could sing about it instead, which is pretty cool. And the other thing, the 2 songs that in a row that always get me, because I find it just so clever, is in the middle of Act One, there's a song called Helpless, which is sung by Hamilton's future wife Eliza. And then right after that is a song called Unsatisfied, which is sung by her sister,
The
Angelica,
jealous sister.
the jealous sister. And it's a bit of a pulp fiction style, bit of twisted of time where we see the one time frame happening, and then the whole thing rewinds, and Angelica tells the story from her perspective. So we hear the story from Eliza as she's getting married about how Angelica introduces her to Hamilton, and then we hear it from Angelica's perspective in Unsatisfied, where she tells it from her perspective about how she was in love with Hamilton, but knew that because of her social stature, there's no way that, and because he was penniless, there's no way that they can make it work. So she introduced him to her sister so that she could keep him in her life, but she'll never be satisfied. And it's just everything about it is just like gut wrenching and so good, but beautiful and musically amazing. And yeah, I find it just astoundingly good.
So as soon as I started watching, I recognized a bunch of the actors, and it turns out that Hamilton was the springboard for these actors to go on to do the movies and TV shows where I became familiar with them. So,
Right.
3 examples. A friend of mine really wanted to go see the movie Twisters. So I went with him, and it's this big blockbuster hit. And Ramos, Anthony Ramos, he
Yeah.
plays John Lawrence and Philip Hamilton.
Yeah.
He's one of the leads in Twisters.
Yeah.
So I recognize him right away. And then Jonathan Groff, who plays the king, who's like the funny guy in the
Yeah.
show. He's the lead in Mindhunter on Netflix about serial killers, like a very dark, it's like the history of how the FBI started a division to learn about serial killers.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and
He also
that's
voices Olaf in Frozen as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And then the last one is Leslie Odom Jr., who plays Aaron Burr. He played Sam Cooke in One Night in Miami, where he was up for the Academy Award for the Golden Globe for Best
Oh, wow.
Actor. So I saw that movie as well. So right away I'm watching, and I knew Lin-Manuel Miranda. And then I saw the other 3 actors. I was like, oh, I'm actually familiar with these actors as well. So.
Yeah, I think it's been a good sort of starting point for a lot of people's careers for sure.
So I have
So,
2 final things, and then we'll wrap this up. So just some acclaim from Billboard and Rolling Stone. So when it came out, Billboard gave the album an eye-popping debut, giving it a 5 out of 5 star review and listing it at number 2 on the magazine's 50 best albums of 2015. And then Rolling Stone gave it a 4.5 out of 5 star rating, listing it at number 8 on the magazine's top 50 albums of 2015. So just a little more acclaim to wrap it up with a bow.
nice. Awesome. That's great. Yeah. And again, I think it's a lot of people are afraid of musicals a little bit. And there have been some terrible musicals. There's a lot of like these jukebox musicals, the ones where they take existing songs and try to shoehorn them into musicals in like Mamma Mia or Rock of Ages or whatever. That's not what this is. This is more in the style of the Leonard Bernstein, the West Side Story kind of like style of thing where the music suits the story. It's not the other way around, and where it's created to tell a story and not just like shoehorned in there. So yeah. And if you have a 3 hour drive and you just want to listen to the whole thing, it's a great way to spend time with the family listening to it. So yeah, please check it out.